Hi, welcome. Our moderators have said, please don't say too much about me. This is about all of us today. So um, I will try to honor what they said. Uh, Michelle Edwards has been a member of AMA since 2017 and a member of the board since 2019. She became a certified mediator in 2003 through the UT project on conflict resolution while completing her master's in social work. She completed her doctorate from the APA accredited counseling and psychology program and has focused her practice on collaborative mediation since. She has a private mediation practice where she has helped many couples through the divorce process. And in addition to her private mediation practice, she provides volunteer mediation services at the Austin DRC. Steve Schulwolf has been a member since this January of 2021 when we pulled him on the board after he did a presentation for our organization, or maybe in the midst of his doing the presentation. He was a commercial litigator for 25 years before he found the way with mediation. And he is involved in many, many organizations, both here in Texas and in Illinois. It's very interesting. He taught in law school in Bulgaria. So sometime I would like to talk with him about that. I think that's a very interesting aspect. He had his 40-hour basic training in Illinois and then a 4-hour training under the auspices of the TMCA and a 30-hour family training at the Austin DRC. He has the distinction of being the person who successfully resolved the first 2 online commercial mediations for the Central Texas Dispute Resolution Center, where he volunteers his time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Michelle and Steve.
Well, thank you, Linda. When I said short, it could have even have been shorter than that, but I appreciate the intro. You know, but
thought it was just going to make
one of the great things about doing some of these programs at the AMA is sometimes we bring in experts, and those experts enlighten us on what they know. Other times we try to tap into the knowledge of this wonderful community. So if people logged in today hoping that they were going to hear Michelle and I go on and lecture about Zoom mediations, I can tell you that's really not our intent. We're here to moderate. We both have been doing since the pandemic our fair share of Zoom mediations, and we want to share with you all some of our experiences, but we also want to learn more by making sure that those of you who are out there who have questions and experiences can participate. And so I guess the one thing that we wanted to start out a little bit by maybe a show of hands is how many people have in fact mediated, whether by Zoom or online, done an online mediation. If we can kind of show a hand for those who have done that. And I guess there was a poll. Oh, great. Wow, this is working great. All right. So I see from the poll, we've got about 17 of the 23 people. And it might be because maybe Michelle and I haven't, answered. So it looks like a little over 71% of folks have done online mediations, and that's great. And I think we'll be able to talk about what the pros and cons, the experiences are on that. I don't mean to pick on anybody, so if nobody feels comfortable, but to the extent that we have a significant minority who still has yet to do a Zoom mediation, if somebody would feel comfortable maybe telling us, why they haven't. Is there something that they're uncomfortable about? Because one of the goals that we're here, trying to help today is, I'll admit I was terrified the first time I did that Central Texas DRC Zoom mediation. But really, after doing it a few times, and we'll talk about tips, it becomes second nature. And so we want to help assist those in our community who, for whatever reason, have some reservations that have held them back from doing any online mediation. So is there somebody here who is brave enough to tell us, what has been holding them back from doing online mediations? All right.
I am currently doing online mediations, but what stopped me from initially starting doing them was just a fear of how to do it, and the just the technical. How do I set up those rooms? How do I get from one room to another? What happens if everybody goes away? That kind of thing. And then the second thing that held me back was I didn't think if people I thought people had to be in the room with me to be able to read their body language, to be able to understand their tone and really know what was going on. And I found after I started doing the Zoom mediations that wasn't anything to be afraid of.
Michelle, what's your experience on that?
I mean, on that specific, what Linda brought up, is that what you're asking? Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing in the very beginning, worrying about like the logistics of it and whether or not I was going to be able to kind of make that connection with the parties. And one thing I did was I had a friend who I got on and practiced with a couple of times, and put her in breakout rooms and practice like the different things. So and then I also, during my own private mediations, have them fill out forms, and I'm used to doing that in person. So I had to scramble to find an online kind of form filling out program, which I did. PDF filler has worked really well for me. And I practiced that with her as well, because you can text a link to sign it. And so I practiced all that. So I felt very nervous about that too. But once I did a couple, but still breakout rooms made me nervous.
I practiced with friends as well. So there was a lot of, especially at the beginning of Zoom, where you were getting together with college or high school friends and having, happy hours. Our happy hours had breakout rooms, right? Because I wanted to send, okay, who wants to discuss football? And, I put them in the football breakout room. And I think that's the great thing about this technology, is for those of you who are still a little bit worried about it. I absolutely agree with Michelle that practicing, in a non, commercial setting would be great. I also think, and I know we have members here of, I think, a couple of the DRCs here. I think I saw some folks from the Austin DRC. I haven't had the fortune of working with them, but I have worked a fair amount with the Central Texas DRC, the Hays County. And for those of you who I think might be worried a little bit, that's another great way to do it, because at least I can't speak for Austin, but I'm sure that this is the case. They have people who have done it a lot. In fact, when I do mediations for Showwolf Mediation, I send out my link, I set up everything. When I do it for the DRC, they send out the link, and it's as easy as joining like it was here today. So I think practicing on friends and maybe reaching out to organizations that have specific experience with it is very helpful. I think the other thing that you said, Linda, was just like a concern about the technology. And the one thing that I have found, just like everything else we worry about, you're over probably analyzing concerns. One of the first mediations I did online was during a thunderstorm. And one thing as a new Austinite that I have since learned is that the power grid isn't exactly the most stable. So a lightning hit and poof, all power to my house went. And so that obviously wasn't great. We lost the Zoom mediation, but you learn, just like you do in person, certain things to do. So one thing now that I do, I give out, especially when there's attorneys on both sides, I give out my cell number. I do that for two reasons. One, if anything happens to the connection, I at least want to reach out to people to let them know, hey, working on this, trying to get everybody back. It's only really happened that one time, but out of paranoia, I do that. The other thing is, I'll just throw something out if we kind of transition to what I like or don't like about online mediation. I don't love Zoom's chat feature in terms of being able to knock on somebody's doors. So if I have breakout room and I'm in an in-person mediation, I knock on the door. And if there's an attorney talking to a client, I give them a couple seconds, and I don't ever want to barge into that conversation. I find, and I'd be very open to, hear what other people, what their experiences are. I find that if I send something in chat, like, are you ready? I'm going to drop by. Not everybody reads the chat, so they might not know. And so I feel a little bit like I've walked into maybe a conversation that in real world I wouldn't have. So sometimes if that's a problem in a particular mediation, I will text them. I think people, for better or worse, check their text more often than they check the chat function. So that's a little bit of a transition to something specific, but maybe a way to open the door to, if other people have stories of how they've been learning to cope with the technology to kind of assuage some of the fears of those who are still on the fence of this, it'd be great to hear other people's experiences.
Yeah, and I would also like to hear about what the questions Linda sent out to everybody. Has your overall experience been positive or negative, and what things have surprised you about it? Maybe things that happened that you didn't expect. So, yeah, we would love to hear from you all.
This is Ellie.
Hi, Ellie.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that surprised me, I was mediating between two parents who were divorced, and there had been abuse, physical abuse in the relationship. And there was a lot of tension with one of the partners about being re-traumatized. And one of the things that I noticed, there were two things. One is that actually the Zoom meeting helped that partner feel more safe. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
We
Can you hear me? Do your thumbs up if you can hear me. Otherwise, I'll just stop. Okay. Not being in the same room physically helped her feel safe, because there was just no possibility of him doing any physical harm. The other thing on the technology is we had sort of a glitch on my side in the technology. So the whole system broke down. But they, because they did have each other's phone numbers and mine, it actually sort of helped them collaborate. Hey, can we get back into this mediation? So sometimes the technology glitch can sort of bring forth more of the shared humanity and the wish to collaborate, to continue in the mediation.
All right, I think you faded a little bit at the end. Actually, Ellie was a plant. We wanted somebody who had slightly, lower bandwidth so that you could see it's not the end of the world. But actually, that's something that you have to deal with on Zoom all the time. I mean, one thing, just from a technical aspect, I think the DRCs, when they send out instructions to people, talk about this, asking people to check their connection in advance. A lot of times people try to do Zoom over the phone. And I have found my experience with that is that gets a little bit more jumpy depending on their cell reception than if they're at home, hardwired. But, putting that aside, I agree with Ellie in that the technology is depending on the type of case. If you had cases in which there was allegations of abuse and it otherwise would have been a situation where you wanted to get security, you wanted to make sure that one side felt comfortable, doing it online, I think has been a positive. And I also agree with Ellie that I think there's a sense during the pandemic, especially among parties who might not use Zoom a lot, that this is something we're all going through together. And I think if you can make light of it at the beginning and talk about if people, maybe they had a little bit difficulty logging on, but you talk about how you've done, had those difficulties too. I think it starts out a Zoom mediation with everybody feeling a little bit more equal. So I'll throw one thing out and ask people if they've, experienced this. I have found I do in my private practice some commercial litigation. And in those cases, a lot of times attorneys talk more than the client when you're at an in-person mediation. It's just not all the time, but I have found that. I have found, in my opinion, that in Zoom mediation, clients feel more equal to their attorney. They're all on the same computer screen. They're not necessarily in the same room. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but I think that there have been mediations that I've done where I definitely think that the way it would have played out in person would have been different because the dynamic of, I think some people feel more comfortable interacting on Zoom than they would have live. And maybe some people it's the opposite. But Michelle, have you had that experience?
Well, I really, that's so interesting, Allie, that you brought that up, because I feel, I have had several people who've come to me that said they wouldn't have done a joint session if it weren't for Zoom. And so I really feel like that has allowed people to do more kind of joint work from different locations. But something else that was interesting is I had a couple who came to me where there was domestic violence, but they were going to do the Zoom mediation in the same home in different rooms. And that made me really nervous because when we're in person, we can let one person leave first and kind of hold the other one back and create space in that way. But if they're at the house together, and so I felt like I had to do a lot of screening with her about like, okay, what are your plans if you feel unsafe? Like, have you told other people, what do you feel like this is gonna, like, what are the things you'll notice in him that would indicate that you need to leave? So I really wanted to make sure that was like, I don't know, she had thought through those things. So in that way, it made me a little bit nervous. But if they're in different locations, I feel like it does, add an ability for people to feel safer. So I appreciate Ellie bringing that up. So what about other people? What have other people's experiences been, positive and negative?
Well,
This is, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
David from the Dispute Resolution Center.
Hi, David.
Hello, everyone. I recognize a lot of faces. And well, there's been a lot of experiences, fears, surprises, lessons learned, and good practices that we've learned so far. And as we do each mediation, we're always learning. Every time we have a mediation, we learn something new. So we're always learning, and we're all in this together. Before starting doing online mediations, there were fears, like you, Steve, afraid, how are we going to do this? Number one, I've always been a late adopter. It was years before I got a cell phone. And but here we started doing online mediations in May of 2020. We shut down probably in March. So it took us 2 months before we started, and we had to, mediations were still, conflicts were still ongoing, and they needed to be addressed. And so we started our first online mediation on May 22nd. So it's been about 15 months already that we've been doing the online mediations. At the DRC, we've done maybe 250 to 300 Zoom mediations. And a couple of the fears were, how is it going to work? There's going to be less humanity, less human contact. It might not work. So in addition to the fear is also the unknown. You didn't know if it was going to work or not. One of the surprises is that it does work. We're getting the same rates of agreement as in-person mediations as we do via Zoom. Let's see here. Lessons learned and good practices. Number one, as you mentioned, getting the cell phone number from giving your cell phone numbers, number one, in case for technology issues, in case they get kicked out and so forth, but also getting their cell phone numbers. As opposed to an office number, they might be at another location. So it's always very important to detail that you want their cell phone numbers and you hand out your cell phone numbers. Another thing, unlike this meeting right now, which is being recorded, we let them know that that please not record the mediation. Sometimes that's a fear of the clients that mediations are being recorded. We impart information two ways. We do intakes when we talk with the parties at first or through email, and also the consent form. And during the intakes, we let them know, as Steve has mentioned, that we need, that it would be preferable that they be in a personal computer laptop with Wi-Fi and make sure that it works. We also let them know that when they log in, to log in 10, 15 minutes beforehand so that they can make sure that they can get in, as opposed to, having to work on those issues when the mediation, the scheduled time for the mediation. Another thing, in addition to the technology, asking them to have the proper technology, during the mediation, we also ask if there is anybody else in the room with them. That's also very important. People can be sitting behind the camera and listening in. So that's part of our spiel, in our introductory remarks, cell phone numbers, and if is there anybody else in the room with them. Another fear or unknown that we had was, how are we going to deal with the agreement writing and get it signatures, and so along the way, we've learned that we can share documents and drafting the documents in front while everybody's in the same room and so forth, as we would normally do in person. And then I know there are other assigning document apps out there. Don't know too much about others, but the ones that we use are Adobe Sign. Another thing that we do at the DRC is that a case manager always joins the mediation in the beginning, does introductory remarks, and then they are put into a breakout room. In other words, They are always accessible at any time during the mediation. We were in a breakout room, we disable our video and mute, but if there's a technical issue or it's time to work on the agreement for signatures, the mediators would call the case manager would join and what have you, and start helping with the agreement writing. And the way Adobe Sign is, the mediators send the copy of the agreement to the case manager, and the case manager puts it into the Adobe system and sends it out for signatures. And I think DocuSign, that's how it works. And then once everybody signs, then everybody gets a copy of that agreement. So that was one of their fears or unknowns, was how do we do the agreement writing? So we use Adobe Sign, and it's worked okay so far. Let's see what else. No recording, cell phone numbers, agreement writing, electronic signatures, payment for your services, and that's part of our intake in the beginning. We send out a link for them to send the payments. Consent forms. We also use Adobe Sign for them to sign our consent forms. We send it out and we get signatures that way. So, it's been very helpful. The surprise is that it works. We've done mediations via phone at the DRC, but that is everybody's in the room, and then we would have somebody call in when they were out of town. But now everybody can be in a different location. And also, what's also helpful for us is that being that it's virtual, we can have mediators. In fact, we have a couple of mediators that have moved away from Austin that are doing mediations. Once in San Diego, once in Maine, and once in Mexico, and they're doing mediations from their location. So
That's
I
great.
think that's what I have so far, but
Well,
it works.
All right. Well, you know what? We knew that David was going to be a meaningful participant in this roundtable. One thing that we were worried was that he would have so much information. We hope that doesn't deter anybody else from jumping in, okay? Because David, thank you very much. That was, extremely thorough. It raised a couple things that I thought I would throw out there. One is, I think online mediation has become almost synonymous with Zoom. And just for those, there are, just like David was talking about, Adobe and DocuSign, which are two different ways in which you can procure people's signature on, documents. There actually are other platforms. I got trained on something called Legaler, which I actually like better in terms of my issue about knocking on the door. It's a little bit easier to go from breakout room to breakout room. I thought that might be beneficial to my private practice. It turns out 99.99%, whether they're attorneys or whether they're parties, at this point are more comfortable with Zoom. So I can say I haven't used another format, but I do think as mediators, if anybody has used whether it's DocuSign, Adobe, Zoom, or a different format, that's something that we can share with everybody. But I completely echo David's, punchline, which is that it works. And I also think that if anybody's on the fence who is thinking, well, this COVID would blow over and then we're going to go back to doing in-person mediations, no doubt, I think people will go back to doing in-person mediations. But my opinion, love to hear about what other people think. I think online mediation is here to stay. Before the pandemic, it was something that there was a niche group of people who were doing, but a lot of mediators, like Linda said up front, felt if I can't look somebody in the eye or read their demeanor, it's not going to be worth it. To me, that's dispelled. And for my commercial practice, many times mediation involves at least one, if not multiple parties getting on a plane and going somewhere. So now the parties have the opportunity to, mediate, as David said, from different states. The one thing that I'd throw out there, I agree that everything's been successful. I think certain cases are impacted by mediation, by online mediation, potentially in a negative way, because perhaps the mindset of the parties, and this might be more commercial matters, might be, if we don't settle it today, we can just press a link tomorrow or the next day. So I do think that for me, becoming a mediator, there's always been something magical about Mediation Day. Mediation Day is the day in which we can, as mediators, help people resolve, their dispute. It's been on their, calendar for a month. Everybody gets geared up for it. And the good faith effort is that we try to reach a deal that day. I have found that, at least in some matters, I think the urgency of reaching a deal that day is less when people haven't had to get on a plane. And so I find that's an interesting dynamic. But relatedly, I think all mediators, good mediators, are persistent. And so what I have found is I've had some commercial cases that didn't settle, but by being persistent and following up with the parties, we wound up settling down the road. Whereas I think if we did that first session in person and it didn't settle, maybe people would have been more dug in. So I feel that, there is a dynamic of how online works to impact parties' expectations, the ease of doing it. But overall, I absolutely agree with David that it works. The only my biggest miss from from in-person mediation is the snacks. I have no excuse to buy people Doritos and Snickers. So if I do that, my wife is going to, tell me that she knows I'm doing that only for myself and not for anybody else. But anybody else out there with opinions about just overall what has worked or what the impact of online has been on their mediations?
I think Susan was raising her hand.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I just have one comment and one question. One thing that we've done at the DRC, I work at the DRC with David, and one thing we do is we offer a pre-technology check before the mediation. If you're talking to people and they seem reluctant to come online or they don't know much about it, we offer to set up a Zoom mediation practice a day before or the morning of, so that we can help assuage some of their uncertainties. And I just wanted to ask if anyone has anywhere a flow chart or a set of directions for setting up breakout rooms and sending people to breakout rooms and bringing them back, because that's the part that's still sort of a question for me. And I do better if I have something written to follow. So if anybody has a handy dandy cheat sheet for breakout rooms, I would really like to have it. So that's my comment.
Okay, thanks, Susan. And then I see Belinda, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was just, as far as a good attribute of online mediation is convenience for all the parties, everybody involved, traveling to and from and setting up a space, and with COVID, that whole situation. So I found that to be very helpful. But I had a question for Michelle, because pre-pandemic, it seemed like in family law cases, people were trending, or the attorneys were trending towards a caucus. And I've done several family mediations online, and I'm able to keep them together more of the time than before. What is your experience?
So it's in most of my cases, I work with pro se couples. And so I think that like family law attorneys I've talked to, most of them like to caucus and don't want to be in the joint session. But like the DRC model in my own private practice, I try to keep them in joint session, and most of my couples are pro se, trying to get through this amicably without attorneys. So so that's kind of a little bit different than maybe somebody who worked more with attorneys, but yeah. And then Diane, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, and I'll answer that too, Belinda, because I keep them together as well. So generally speaking, I mean, on Zoom always. but I had two things. As a therapist like Michelle, my kind of brain seems to go on the hour, and I'm doing a lot of online therapy now, which also is here to stay. So that's how I kind of got warmed up for online mediation, because I also was a kind of a skeptic. One thing that I've noticed with online mediation is the rhythm is really different than a mediation in person. So in person, you're listening maybe for about an hour and 15 minutes, then somebody probably has to go to the bathroom or somebody has to get a drink. And so there's a natural break point. And then, you spend another hour, there are going to be points where people are like, you know what, okay, I need a break. And it doesn't happen as smoothly, or the rhythm isn't the same in an online mediation. And so I have started to kind of train my brain to kind of put in some breaks, or at least check in on some breaks for people, even if it doesn't feel as smooth as it does in an in-person one. That's one thing. And then the other thing, when David was talking about payment, so as I do most of my work online now, I bill online, and I send clients a statement how much they owe, and or I bill their card if I have permission to bill their card. That's my therapy clients for copay. And I've done a couple of mediations so far, where I've sent them a bill too. And then I realized, even though I've been paid for all of my private mediations now that I've done online, I realized they don't just immediately go and pay as my therapy clients might, because they're going to get a bigger bill. It's not going to be a $15 copay. And so I've written into my mediation forms that prior to the mediation, I'm going to ask them for like a one out payment for 1 hour or something. And then because I'm one who doesn't charge by a 4-hour block, I charge by the hour. And then after the mediation, then I'll be able to bill their card for the remainder of the time if we use it, or I can refund them, that kind of thing. But that was just a safeguard for me, because for one person, for instance, for one half of the mediation, it took several weeks to get payment, and it kind of freaked me out. Like, is this person really going to stiff me for this? So it's just a tip.
Thanks, Diane. I think one thing, following up on what Diane said, I think the first two online mediations I didn't eat lunch, because I went from breakout room to breakout room, and that, by 5 o'clock, I realized I was really hungry. So I think Diane's point about, it can get away from you on that. And so there's nothing wrong. Like, at first I was thinking I'm not doing a service to the parties. And so I just realized, I just told, when I left one breakout room, I went to a mediators breakout room, grabbed a quick bite to eat, because, you don't want to eat in front of. So working out lunch was something that was a work in progress for me. I noticed Anissa Johnson put a how to use Zoom breakout rooms. That's in the chat. So for those of you who are looking at that, thank you very much. We've got a couple people with their hands up. Tony Luttrell, looks like your hand up was up first. So you're on.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to comment on was Steve had mentioned or asked whether or not other people had used different platforms, and I have. I used, because I decided if it was good enough for CNN, it would be good enough for me. And so I started using Cisco's WebEx.
Okay.
And I find it to be much easier for me to find to set up the breakout rooms. And I don't recall whether Zoom, does Zoom send the invitations? to the mediation?
It has, once you set up in Zoom on your calendar, then you can copy a link and then throw that. You either have it Zoom integrated into your email directly, or you can copy and paste it into an email.
Well, that was one of the things that I had trouble with. And so WebEx actually sends the invitations directly to the people. All I do is type in their email address and it goes directly to them, and then I get a copy of it. So that might be something that somebody might be interested in. There was something else that, oh, I know. I am a mediator for the Texas Department of Insurance. I don't know if anybody else on here is, but they do, if I have trouble billing a client, because obviously those are commercial clients, if I have trouble billing a client or getting paid for billing a client, the Texas Department of Insurance steps in, which is really handy. And they, I don't know, belittle, I don't know how they do it, but I always get paid, and I get paid in advance. And so that's really been helpful for me, because sometimes it is hard to collect from or it's been hard for me to collect from individuals for whom I have mediated. Those are the ones for the Department of Insurance are businesses, because I'm mediating between healthcare providers and out of network providers. So that makes a difference. But I have had tremendous success with WebEx. I've never dropped it at all. Nothing has ever happened. So if somebody might want to try that, you might find it helpful.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
I guess I have one follow-up, because my experience when I've even suggested a different platform is that it's turning the clock back to the first day of the pandemic. I have found that parties who have used Zoom, even if they don't love it, they've used it so they're comfortable with it. So every time I have suggested a different platform, as the mediator, I tell people, I'm not ordering you to use this. I'm the one who needs to be flexible to meet your needs. So every time I've thrown that out there, it's always been rejected. When you do, I also do TDI mediations, and I echo your sentiments. They're great and very helpful for getting people to pay. So I take it you're doing your surprise billing TDI mediations through WebEx?
Yes, I'm doing almost everything through WebEx now, and I've not had a single, let me think. I don't think I've had a single question about it or reticence about using it at all. So I do find that people like me today, because if you saw me, you would be horrified, prefer to use their picture, or they prefer not to use video at all. And so that's the only issue that I've had with WebEx or Zoom or anything, is that people prefer, or at least in my case, people have preferred just to use audio and not video, which is harder to, to get a read on someone's body language or reactions. But I'm primarily at this moment working with businesses, and they have a different kind of what's the word, they have a different kind of reaction, I guess, because with businesses, the cases that I've had, they get to a certain point and then they say, we can't come to a mutual conclusion now. And so that's been the only problem that I've had, is that I find that doing it online creates kind of a distance for people. And in doing so, then they're willing to say, I don't care to settle today. And then they go about their business and I go about mine. And it happens with the TDI clients particularly.
Well, thank you. I don't want to, I'd be fascinated to talk to you maybe offline about your TDI experiences, because I'm not 100% sure whether a success rate or not on some of those surprise billing disputes is because of the medium of the mediation as opposed to kind of the way that whole new system has been set up. But to the extent other people are not doing those, I don't want to bog us down with that. But Tony, thank you very much. You know, you mentioned about seeing faces. One other thing, you know, we're just talking about technical thing. I moved about a month ago, and I'm still playing around with avoiding looking like I'm in the witness protection program because at first behind me, I didn't have these shades. I've got a light that I had to buy, but you know, you can Google, if you're not happy with how your setup are, there's many people out there who are offering advice on lighting, and it can really make a big difference in terms of, you know, how you look. So I'm not thrilled about right now my new setup and need to improve that, but that's just part of doing these. I see Craig, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, well, I think maybe David was ahead of me. If you want to go to him first.
Oh, go right ahead, Craig. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I might say that, you know, I'm just a volunteer mediator. I don't have the caseload that professional mediators have, but I've done a dozen or so of the Zoom mediations. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I like Zoom mediations better than in-person mediations that we do now because we don't have to wear a mask and we don't have to have this incredible physical distance that we have in in-person mediations. So that's a little bit better. I think some of the issues are that some people, well, the equipment that people have just varies. Some people have no cameras on their computer. And as Tony said, a lot of people just refuse to use their cameras. And I find that about half the time, at least one person refuses to use the camera, which makes it it just makes the dynamics different. And so it's not as good. Also, depending on their equipment or whether they're using phones, my ability to use screen share is hampered. Sometimes I can't use screen share sometimes, which is a big deal for me because I like to do it not just for writing up the MSA, but for, you know, with the collaborative problem solving. It's great to have a document up there and you're keeping track of the creative solutions they're coming up with, things like that. You can't do a lot of times when people are not able to see the screen like you can see it and like the other party can see it. You're almost back to telephones. So I think if we just had some kind of minimum requirement for equipment, that would be helpful. And to get people to use their video and to also, I think that we've had two, at least, people doing the mediation while they're driving on the road, which, I mean, this technology just kind of encourages that. People think they can do it anywhere, any place, anytime. And so they're driving. So, I'd say that's happened. What I do like, though, is on the breakout rooms, you don't have to worry about giving people an assignment or what to think about because they're at their home. They can do anything they want. You know, they can look at their email, they can eat something, they can go away so the breakout rooms really work quite well for that reason. And I think, as Dave can say, we've worked out some more things about how to do the breakout rooms a little better than we used to, particularly when we got a case manager who's sitting in one of them. Also, you have to be a little more careful about how you use them. But one of the things that I have been surprised at is I've always thought, well, how easy it is just to say, I'm out of here. Click, click, they're gone. No one's ever done that yet that I've seen. So they tend to stick around better. Maybe there's just no threat. Maybe they don't feel they can threaten you as much on Zoom, but that's what I found. And finally, as a mediator, what I really love about Zoom or the Zoom mediations is we get sent all the backup information a day ahead of time. So it's not like we're walking in 20 minutes before a mediation and we got to absorb 10 pages of small claims filings and stuff like that. We can spend an hour looking at stuff if we need to when we're doing a Zoom mediation. So that's what I had to say.
Well, thanks, Craig. You talked about the informality. A couple months ago, there was a judge in Florida who had to issue an order that he didn't want attorneys who are doing hearings in front of him to be in bed and to actually, So I do think that there has been, whether it's mediation, litigation, somewhat of an erosion of the formality. And I think that's what I was alluding to a little bit on. It also can cut into what the expectations of the parties are if they feel like it's a little less formal or a little less significant. But I think, like you said, at the end of the day, it's not like people are hanging up willy-nilly. And so I think for the most part, it's been successful. Before we go to David, I see there is a question in the text. Stephen, Michelle, how do you handle payment in private mediations? I really tell the parties, I expect payment in advance. And for some, like for the TDI ones, if we don't have it, if payment, if it's the day before and I still haven't gotten paid, I'll follow up and we'll reschedule. And as Tony pointed out, the TDI is great. They wind up, talking to people and you get paid. I'll say something that hasn't worked for me, in that I have a button on my website administered through LawPay, which would allow somebody with a credit card to just pay through my website. I pay a monthly fee for that. I have yet to have a client do it. So I mean, they've sent me checks in advance. Some of the repeat parties, I now have given them my ACH information so that they will send that directly. So LawPay for me was something that theoretically sounded like a great idea, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you think your client base is likely to use it. That's just been my experience. Michelle, I don't know what your experience has been on that.
Well, I send out a mediation contract with kind of all the kind of agreements between me and the parties about the mediation. And one of the things is that, I require a deposit of 1 hour of the 3-hour block that we book. And then I also collect up front the cost of writing the mediated settlement agreement. I charge a flat fee because I'm usually working on long divorce cases and I'm writing up a pretty extensive agreement with what they've just, come to an agreement on a mediation. So I collect that fee up front so that I'm not chasing it afterwards. So that's been my experience. And I haven't had, any problems with people not paying. So, and then let's see. And then something else I wanted to add is when Craig was talking, something that I really liked about online mediations is I remember a mediation where Craig and I were texting back and forth about, at one point he said, I think you need to move on to her. And if we're in the same room, we couldn't have that micro communication that we had about our mediations. So that was, I really enjoyed that. So, well, let's move to David since his hand was up.
Okay, and I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time. Some commentary that I've heard from attorneys is that they've been spoiled. They don't have to go to hearings now. They can just do it from their office and they don't have to wait and spend their client's money while they're waiting and then waiting the docket and then and have the judge hear their case. Now they can just go in at the time that they're assigned to, and they're saving a lot of time. Mediation, they're liking virtual mediations. In other words, as opposed to getting in their car, driving in traffic, finding a parking space, and then going to the mediation, it's just at the allotted time, and they can take care of business, instantly, virtually. And so I think I don't know, because I don't know the future in terms of what's going to happen with regards to mediations at the Dispute Resolution Center, but I think it will be a hybrid, and I think mediations online will continue. The attorneys, at least from the attorneys, they benefit from that. And I think it will continue. And once the pandemic or we can go back to as normal as we can with regards to the pandemic, we will have more in-person mediations, but I think the number of virtual mediations will stay the same or continue. So that's one. And one last thing with regards to breakout rooms. I've heard from and a couple of mediators that they create a joint session breakout room, as opposed to right now we're all in the main room, right? And then usually if you're in joint session, you stay in the main room. And if you want breakouts, and you send the parties to breakout rooms and go back and forth. But by opening a joint session room and calling it the joint session room, and then going and starting the mediation from that room, it's easier to move people between rooms, as opposed to when you open rooms and everybody comes back to the main room and then you have to send people back up and forth. But I haven't experienced it in too much, but if anybody has, or anybody has comments on that, but I think he's mentioned that it works very well, and it's easier to move people back and forth from a joint room as opposed to always having to go back to joint session and so forth.
I do that, David, but don't call it joint session, or you'll see there'll be two joint sessions on your breakout room thing. Call it something else, common, or give it a more distinctive name.
Okay.
And you do have the ability to rename rooms. I think the only other thing about that, David, I agree with that. If somebody gets kicked out, they then, when they rejoin, go to the main room. So that was something like the first time it happened, kind of freaked me out because we lost somebody and I didn't know where they were at. So if you do wind up having everybody in some type of renamed breakout room and you need to go let somebody back in, you need to go to the main room itself. Well, it looks like we're at one. Stea has put a survey and evaluation link that's in the chat. So we very much would appreciate if everybody, I don't know, Michelle, will people get this via email as well, or are we asking people right now to click on this? Do you know?
I
think
not the right person to ask.
I think if you can click on it right now, you don't have to fill it out until after, but just go ahead and click on it in the box. We don't usually send it out afterwards, although that's a good idea.
And Linda, do you have something you wanted to add before?
Yeah, right before we started, we were talking about how widespread is this Zoom mediation? Are all the DRCs doing this? And I know that I contacted the Waco DRC, and the response back was they've had a grand total of 2 mediations in person since the pandemic began. And they've had no one request an in-person mediation. And I know, Steve and Maricela, you're Hayes County, and you said that's primarily Zoom also. And David, you've just started doing in-persons, is that right?
No, we've been doing it a year in person. We've done about 34 in-person mediations in 15 months.
Okay. So I personally believe this is here to stay, not for all mediations, but I believe the convenience to people and the convenience to attorneys. I mean, I did a mediation with the Waco DRC, and one of the attorneys said, hey, I've got a hearing, but it's only going to take 10 minutes. It'll probably be one of the times when you're caucusing with the other party. And that's what happened. So it wasn't the attorney having to leave the DRC and go to the courthouse and come back. It was just, he was gone 10 minutes and talked to the judge and came back. Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Linda, and thank you, everybody. We really appreciate, I know so many people have more experiences. I wish we had more time because there's just a lot of good experience in this group. So thank you for joining us today. And does anybody have any questions before we log off? I guess not. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.